Hello, my friends. Mrs. Surratt here to talk to you about our last developmental theory, which is Freud's theories. And before I begin today, I would like to take a moment just to point out that some of Freud's theories can be a little uncomfortable. There's going to be a lot of talk about sex today. Of course, we're all mature psychology students, so I know we can handle this. But if you find yourself feeling uncomfortable, please keep in mind that as you study things, you're not required to agree with them. You're just required to be aware of them. Sometimes it's as important to be aware of the things that we don't agree with so that we know paths not to take as the things we do agree with. As usual, here is the unit that we're finishing up. So we've been talking about the stages of development. Hopefully you're feeling pretty comfortable with those. We've been talking about the physiological, cognitive, and social changes that occur over our lifespan. We're looking at some research today, Freud's research on development. And we understand factors that allow for individual difference, and we've been talking about developmental issues. So hopefully you've been feeling pretty good about that. So today we're going to talk about the psychoanalytic approach, and I think I'm going to move over here and see if I can keep from being in the way of the information. The psychoanalytic theory has three major parts. The theory of personality dynamics, which has to do with your level of consciousness, the theory of personality structure, and the theory of psychosexual development. And Freud, he was a very serious kind of guy. He came up with these three parts to try and explain people in as much detail as possible. And it has influenced a lot of research even today, by the way. So the levels of consciousness that we talk about are your conscious mind, which is your active mind. That's what's going on kind of in your brain at all times. Your perceptions, your memories, your thoughts, your fantasies, your feelings. All of these things happen in our conscious mind where we are aware of them and see them. But there's also your preconscious mind. This is kind of like available memory, like it's like in your computer. You haven't used it yet, but it could be memory as you need it. We can get to it whenever we need to. And then the unconscious mind. This is the part of the mind that we're really not aware of. When we talk about psychoanalysis, we talk about what drives you. Maybe it's your past. Maybe there's something going on in your unconscious mind. Maybe there's a repress, a motive, a memory, something that drives you, but you're not really thinking about it. You're not really aware. And very often Freud might say, well, what happened in your childhood? Or do you find yourself getting incredibly angry all the time? So this is kind of like the part of your mind that pushes you forward, but you're not really aware of what it is. And Freud says you can trust him. He's a doctor. So how does our personality work? Well, according to Freud, it has three parts. The first is the id, then the ego, and last the superego. And as you can see, here is the ego up on top, and it's very small. And if you notice, there's like this line. This is what you're conscious of up here, your ego and maybe a little bit of your superego. But take a look. Most of Freud, what Freud's talking about, your unconscious and your preconscious, he's saying it's pretty much not something you're aware of. I'm sorry, I clicked the button a little too fast there. So it's an interesting thought that maybe a lot of what drives us, we're not even sure what it is. So starting first with the id, I don't know why the word id did not come up here, but these are the instincts and the biological parts. This is the part that's all underneath in that unconscious. It's like if you think of an iceberg, this is what's underwater. It's situated in your unconscious mind. It's the original system of your personality, so it's kind of what you present to people. And according to Freud, your id is very immoral. It's only concerned with pleasure. And pleasure can be sexual, but can also be gratifying your senses. Eating something, listening to music you like. It's always pushing you to find something that you enjoy. And it's where a lot of your psychic energy kind of resides. The next is the ego. Sorry, I don't know where id went there, guys. The ego, and the ego is our more human quality, and some of it does pop up a little above the surface, but a lot of it's kind of below. Or I'm sorry, the ego, I'm sorry, is in the surface, sorry. Um, and it's our human quality, it's more conscious, it works on the reality principle, it kind of recognizes what's going on around us. It's the executive of our personality. It's what makes our decisions. Even though we have this id pushing us, it doesn't mean that we always go with it. Sometimes we'll say, no, I can't do that now. It's the more organized part, and it's very psychological. It's the part that we can kind of access more easily. And last is our superego. And again, guys, I'm sorry, I don't know why these words aren't popping up. This is the moral arm of your personality. This is the part that makes and you'll notice some of it's a little above in our conscious, but a lot of it's down below. It's in our preconscious mind. So we can access it, but we don't always know it's there. But it's the one that pushes us to learn moral values, and it's more sociological. It thinks about the world around us and how we can be a part. Oh, there's the id. And there's the superego. Okay, sorry about that. I'll have to go fix my transitions there. So that id is really below the surface, and if you look at it, it's huge. And we talked about that picture before. So according to Freud, most of our personality is hiding. Most of our personality is below the surface, and we don't even know it's there. But if you notice, he says that we put a lot more emphasis on pleasure than any other part. So that ego and that superego are pretty small, and they've got to control that huge id, which is all about finding pleasure and all about finding happiness. So the theory of psychosexual development that Freud talks about says that that sex is the life urge. It's our fundamental motive in life. Why do we do anything? According to Freud, it's all about sex. And he says all physical pleasure is somehow sexual. And by sexual, he kind of refers to what we think of sexual, but also more like sensual, like pleasing to our senses in a way. Sometimes that gets confused. He says that sexuality is something we're born with. Basically, we are expressing it from a young age. It doesn't necessarily mean sexuality as we think of, but like sensuality. We're always exploring our senses. He said that children have an infantile sexuality, something that pushes them to explore their senses. And he says a child will go through 5 stages of psychosexual stages. So here's a picture for you. Freud says, I'm not saying it's sex, but it's sex. That's kind of his thing. So let's talk about the oral stage of birth to 2 years. This stage is characterized by the mouth being the primary focus, the erogenous zone. So infants will find gratification by feeding, sucking, biting, and the point of this stage is the weaning process, helping the child to become less dependent on their caretakers. If a child can't really get past this point, if they're fixated on their mouth, if they can't really move beyond this, then Freud believes they would have issues with dependency or aggression. So they might be super aggressive, or maybe they'll always be kind of dependent upon another person. This could result in things like drinking problems, binge eating or overeating, smoking, nail biting, anything to do as an adult with the mouth. So if you're one of those people who get nervous, and you work with your hangnail or whatever, he would say you had an issue at the oral stage. The anal stage comes next, and it runs between 2 to 3 years old. And in the anal stage, it's more focused on the anal region, obviously. Basically, this is the stage about retention and expulsion of feces, which makes sense. I mean, this is the potty training stage. So according to Freud, a child who's successful in this stage will be far more competent, productive, creative, organized as an adult. If you have a negative experience in this stage or problems in this stage, you might be an unorganized person, a very messy or incompetent person, or maybe you don't have a whole lot to your personality. So Freud thought this was very important towards the development of you as a person. The phallic stage comes between ages 4 to 6, according to Freud, and this is that children find pleasure in focusing on the genital region. They play with this area. If you think about the fact that children have to discover their hands and their feet, it kind of makes sense that we go through a discovery process about our own body, including our genital area. Children start to notice that men and women have different sex organs. And this is where Freud talks about his various complexes, like the Oedipus complex, where a boy is sexually attracted to his mother, or the Electra complex, where the girl is sexually attracted to her father. And these come from the Greek myth characters of Oedipus and Electra, who were both involved in issues with their mother and father. He also believes there's during this time a castration complex, that boys are afraid someone will remove their sex organ, so they try to hide the fact that they're playing with it because they don't want to lose that part. So Freud was very big on this concept of the mother being the root of a lot of people's problems. And so again, he would often go back to childhood. What was it like with your mom? What did you do? The latency stage comes between ages 7 to 12, and it's when kids kind of prefer the company of their own gender. They kind of neglect members of the opposite sex. And you may have seen this, boys or girls think that the opposite sex has cooties. They don't want to play with each other, and maybe like a boy will run over and he'll be sweet to a girl, and other people kind of make fun of him because he's being nice to a girl, or vice versa. This is where your sexual or sensual interest is derived from the external world. You begin to look around you to start to learn more about the world around you. So it's very important in developing social skills and communication skills, as well as self-confidence. Basically, guys, if you don't do well at this stage, you might be someone who can't relate well to the world, is what he was saying. And then fifth, starting at age 13, is the genital stage. He says that there's more of an attraction toward the opposite sex, but basically it's kind of referring to more of a sexual attraction in general, what we think of as the actual action of sex and the sexual desire. This is where you'll see more self-stimulation of sex organs. Children of this stage start to not only love themselves, but also to recognize that partners can be involved in both emotional love and physical love. There can be more mature sexual relations at this point. And so in the earlier stages where focus was really individual need, now this is a switch to a focus on the need of your partner. At this point, if all the stages have been successful, by now the individual should be very well balanced, warm, and caring towards another individual. And the goal of this stage is to start trying to find a balance, trying to look at your various life areas and figure out how to balance them and work them out. And I just thought this was a cute little picture, so that's why I included it. So Freud talks about some very important instincts that I want to bring up. One is the life instinct. Eros. And Eros is extremely important. He says that these instincts fight within us at all times, so we need to have a greater amount of life instinct in us than the death instinct. So I'm going to go through the life instinct first, the Eros. This is our general impulse to live, and it aims at survival of the species, trying to get to continue the species, and manifests love through sex. So according to Freud, if you have a high life instinct, a high eros, then you have a high sex drive. The libido is that life-maintaining energy he talks about, and he says this is the part that seeks pleasure through sexual gratification. He said if there's a flow that is blocked with the libido, this could cause you to be more neurotic or have issues. The death instinct, on the other hand, is known as thanatos. And thanatos is the desire to destroy, or the desire to die. And it creates a lot of conflict and anxiety within people. And it can be manifested through cruelty, aggression, even suicide, unfortunately. And he said that the life instincts and death instincts decide the quality and satisfaction of a person's life. If you tend more towards eros, you have a more satisfying life. If you tend more towards thanatos, you're more of a destroyer. Your life will generally be less satisfying. And last but not least, Freud talked about a number of defense mechanisms. The first one being repression. How do we defend ourselves from things that happen around us? So repression, he says, is an unconscious mechanism. It's something that we don't do on purpose, but we don't want to have these disturbing or threatening thoughts that are below the surface coming up. So we repress them, we push them away. So for example, according to Freud, during the Oedipal complex, um, we have these aggressive thoughts about the parent of the same sex because he believes that we want to be with the parent of the other sex. So we repress this, but it causes us to maybe lash out or get angry. The next one that he talks about is denial. And denial is where we just refuse to recognize certain external events. If a situation is too much to handle, we just refuse to experience it. We just pretend it's not there. So, for example, a smoker might say, oh no, smoking's not bad for your health. They're lying about that. Even though we know it's true, but they just don't want to be aware of that situation. Projection is when we take our own unacceptable thoughts or feelings and we put them on another person. So you might not like somebody, but your superego might be saying, well, that hatred, that's unacceptable. You can't not like this person. So you decide to solve the problem by saying, oh, well, the truth is they don't like me. I would like them. I would totally like them, but they don't like me. So that is projection, when you push your thoughts onto another person to make it more acceptable. Displacement is when you have an impulse and you satisfy it with a substitute object. Like if you're angry at your boss at work, you can't really punch your boss, but you might go home and kick your dog or punch a pillow or, yell at your significant other. So displacement is where you take that feeling and you satisfy it by putting on something else. For example, if you ever heard the term eat your feelings, well, maybe if you're depressed because someone's not being kind to you, maybe you eat ice cream as a way to kind of satisfy yourself and displace that unhappiness. Regression kind of goes back towards moving backwards in psychological time. So if you're stressed out, you kind of go backwards through the stages instead of going forward. So for example, if a child is born and the older sibling might suddenly refuse to go to the bathroom on the toilet or wet their bed because they feel like they're being substituted or replaced. And last but not least, sublimation is where you're satisfying an impulse with a substitute object. So you're doing something socially acceptable, but you're also taking care of a personal need. Sports is a great way of explaining sublimation. Maybe you're really aggressive and you love to play soccer, so you like being on a forward, someone who kicks the ball and takes it towards the goal, and you really get into it and you're really kicking that ball and getting around people. Well, that's perfectly acceptable because you're playing a sport and you're following the rules, but you're also letting out some of that inner aggression or tension. So, what do you think? The thing about Freud is that his theories were very revolutionary at the time. People were blown away by his concepts and ideas. He kind of had one of the first really accessible psychological theories. And he was also very interested in different kinds of treatment. In fact, he experimented with drugs like cocaine and came to enjoy it so much himself, he did offer it as gifts to his family and friends. So there was a difference in opinion about appropriate drugs, not appropriate drugs. Heroin was another one of the time, opium. So he kind of experimented, he kind of pushed the boundaries of that time period. Some psychologists think that his work is just baloney. They don't have anything to do with it. Others think that there could be some merit to his work. Whether or not you agree, it is definitely an interesting perspective on the human experience. So I invite you guys, there's some questions throughout this. Please go ahead and fill those out. And definitely be thinking about this in terms of development, and we'll get back together on Thursday and maybe we can talk a little bit about it. Have a good day, guys.